How are you feeling after you heard those words? This is one of those texts from the lectionary which I am not anxious to preach, quite frankly. So it's not because I don't believe that there is value in what has become known as the Ten Commandments. It's not because I don't think that what's written here and what's given for our instruction isn't important or can be ignored. It's more about cringing, about how this text and many other scriptures have been used against people. At face value, the text that Aaron just read can be seen as a daunting list of do's and don'ts, rules. This is how these verses are usually used. If we regard them as a list of rules that have to be kept 100% of the time, or face an angry God, well, then they're terrifying. If these verses are viewed objectively, and it becomes obvious how impossible it is to keep them, we either have to assume it's a mechanism of control, or everything needs to be thrown out with the reasonable conclusion, religion is oppressive and exclusionary. Look at all these people who can never keep up to all these requirements, and therefore look at everyone who is excluded, including us. Just last week, Rod checked out an old library book for our granddaughter, and according to her, it was published in the last millennium. So this book encourages young readers to get out of their own way, to see things differently. For those of us who've always considered this text that Aaron read from Exodus as a list of do's and don'ts, a tool to show who's pretty good, who's near perfect, who's bordering on evil, a measurement of who's in and who's out, we also may need to find a way to get out of our own way. Maybe this cartoon will help us to get out of our own way. Have a look. Take just a minute to read through that. Right? If we read ancient Hebrew texts such as Exodus 20 through the lens of the mission and the character, the actions and the words of Jesus, we have a much better chance of getting out of our own way. Jesus was by no means an anarchist, conforming to no regulations. And it wasn't as if he was never confronted with rules, commands, and questions about what's appropriate, even about what's the most important. It seems people have always wanted to be in the middle of the righteousness club, especially if that was then connected with power. But Jesus never allowed himself to be tricked into smallness or exclusionism, nor backed into a corner. He simply stated, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's it. And that's enough. As is the case with many things, it's hard to confine the dynamic things of life into either a yes or a no, an up or a down, an everything or a nothing. The ones who see everything black and white find the Ten Commandments easier to handle. Nuance and paying attention to a larger context and history requires time and exacting care. Rules used as rigid mechanisms for control are lethal. Rules as regulators and guidance for a wider and fuller humanity are life-giving. In these verses, I see at least 4 themes that form the DNA of these regulators. There's a reminder, respect, rhythm, and a reassurance. Right up front, it's as if God says, remember me? I'm not one of the capricious or strictly circumscribed divinities you came in contact with as you observed other people worshiping in Egypt. Remember, I am the God of the burning bush, the God who cared enough to set you free from slavery, oppression, and suffering, the one who nourishes you in the dry and arid places. That's me. I'm so much more all-encompassing than all of the deities of the various jurisdictions, patron gods of regions, creator gods of specific rivers and mountain ranges, goddesses of food and drink, goddesses of the rising sun, gods of war, and goddesses of song. It's as if God reminds the people of Israel, please remember who I am. I encompass it all. This historical and relational reminder is the foundation to and the backdrop for what comes next. History is important. Without an understanding of history, experience and regulations happen in a vacuum. It's only after God's character and identity have been reestablished that meaningful direction can be received. The most profound theme, it seems to me, within the Ten Commandments has to do with respect. Respect for God and respect for others. Living in a culture in which careful attention to others is waning, it takes a minute to regroup and to remind ourselves how fundamental it is. Respect has to do with valuing others above ourselves, not looking out primarily for our own interests, but each of us looking to the interests of others. That's from Philippians 2, as EJ reminded us last week. This sounds so simple, but when seriously incorporated into our daily interactions, in personal relationships, correspondence, on social media, in meetings, at work, it is a silent yet a volcanic revolution. Value others above yourself and value God above all that poses as worthy of our adoration. So many things, priorities, interests, uses of our time vie for our attention. Valuing God above all things in no way confines us to monasteries or banishes us to deserts of narrowness. It does invite us to create a deep reservoir from which to draw from when cheap replicas, idols, lure us in with their addictive thrall. Value God and value others. That's revolutionary. Valuing others begins with honoring your father and your mother, your lineage, your ancestors, your bloodline. We're not islands, not self-made, not detached from all that our ancestors experienced and valued, fought and resisted for. This is where you come from. You hold these genes, this DNA deep within your soul, and it gives you belonging, a place, a home. We will all one day be a part of that vast multitude who are ancestors. Live in a way that will have value for those who come after you. Respect life. Even at a time when brushing over the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people as mere statistics, or even debating the legitimacy of these numbers has become commonplace, do not take a life. Negligence is complicity. Having a cavalier attitude is playing Russian roulette with others' lives and well-being. Keeping silent is a slippery slide into calloused taking of life. Respect and keep your promises with your partner and allow others to do the same. Even in our time, yes, even now, when people holding the most public, political, and religious offices are taking liberties that fly in the face of human dignity, it's still important. We know this. And yet the constant presence of this kind of behavior erodes our own sense of character and decency over time. We too need to be reminded. Does this translate into remaining in threatening or demeaning relationships? Not at all. It means that every relationship is given the opportunity to reach its highest potential, and we will not voluntarily endanger that. Respect others' property. Do not grab what's not yours, whether that's cheating on your taxes or otherwise taking and keeping what isn't yours to have. Respect others enough to have integrity in how you speak. This includes a lot more than not blatantly lying, though it seems this would be a bare minimum. Speaking the truth under oath also should be a given. But to avoid testifying falsely against one's neighbor also includes high standards of conversation and interaction. Not interrupting, respecting differences, no name calling either in front of the person or behind their backs, avoiding passive-aggressive comments, being honest regardless of whom we're speaking with. Be content with what you have and recognize the difference between what is legitimately yours and what is not. Greed and self-interest are rampant. It feels very normal to want things. I mean, continually and passionately to want things and people. Consumerism, indiscretions, overextending are all vices that underscore our tendency to desire and take. And then the remaining two R's, rhythm and reassurance, which are mentioned in less detail, but they provide an important balance to all of this. Without either rhythm or reassurance, it becomes difficult to consistently maintain respect. There is the rhythm of work and rejuvenation, active engagement, and intentional rest. I find it's becoming increasingly difficult to shut off. In fact, I found that this isolation, this pandemic isolation, hasn't really made it easier to shut off than when I was on the go and could go without restriction. Even when I put work aside, it seems my mind is working overtime, processing the sheer volume of things that come my way from everywhere, not just work, but from news and opinions and family and health and the environment and on and on. There seem to be no moments of reprieve. Just another reference to our granddaughter because she happened to be in our home for a week. She and I were having this conversation about a time in history when I was just a few years older than she is right now. I told her how the traumatic events of that time caused a dread within me, so that every morning when I woke up, I dreaded, oh no, what's going to happen today? It's certainly no less that way today. We constantly have to resist becoming addicted to the latest news, the most salacious news, the ups and the downs of hope and despair in it all. All of it is addictive. The rhythm of Sabbath will need to include shutting off, determining to take a specific time each week simply to unplug. I recall reading about the resolve of a prominent journalist who said that she would not take her electronic devices into her bedroom after a certain hour each day. This is part of Sabbath. Sabbath is a part of self-care. Designating mealtimes, for example, as a media-free zone, a time to connect with family members, or a time to listen to music, is another observance of Sabbath. The Sabbath, as the Jewish community celebrates it, is a conscious day of remembering creation, honoring the beauty and abundance that Creator God has gifted us with, and also consciously lamenting environmental losses. We heard reference to this right at the beginning of worship in the words Vicky spoke as we all came together. Recurring reminders help us reorient and recalibrate. And I need that so desperately at this time. And maybe you do as well. Hearing all of these words must have felt rather intimidating to the initial recipients. Many of us have heard them before, and we still find them overwhelming. The text speaks of thunder and lightning, the sound of a horn blowing, the sight of smoking mountains, all very frightening phenomena. It could be that these were literal physical occurrences. It could also be that the people present felt that their whole world was shaking as they received these directives. It was time for reassurance. When the people said, Moses, we don't want to speak with God ourselves. You go do it for us because we will surely die. Moses simply says, don't be afraid. After all, this was not the first time Moses had been in the presence of God, and he had come out of those able to tell about them. What I take from this is when there is noise and bluster, when things around us and within us quake and shake, when we hear threats and reports of assaults on our freedoms, when there are frightening occurrences in nature, when there are diagnoses, when there is treatment, we too can take heart with the words, don't be afraid. Throughout history, people have been confronted with experiences and challenges that were far beyond their capability to navigate. This is when the reminder of who God is takes on new meaning. The God who said, I will be who you need me to be, is near. The God who has given directions not to intimidate us, but to provide a framework within which we can have freedom that goes far beyond the freedoms that we feel we need to fight for and restore or take hold of forcefully. The freedom to remember, to respect, to honor the rhythms of nature, to rest in divine reassurances. This freedom gives us the opportunity to love, to include, to draw the circle wide. Because we have been offered a life-giving freedom, a life-giving framework, we can extend that to everyone. I believe this is in keeping with how we experience Jesus, the one who confronted the accusers of someone who had been brought before him for breaking the law with the words, I do not condemn you. This is inclusion at its finest. This is a God who is for people, for you, for me, and all of those who are reeling under the strain of daily pressures and experiences. Jesus is still out there drawing a circle around all those who are in. This is grounds for foundational and profound hope. And this is the hope that I call each of us to today. Amen.